Welcome to the Federalist Society's Practice Group podcast. The following podcast was recorded on Wednesday, December 4th, 2013, during a live telephone conference call held exclusively for Federalist Society members.
Welcome to the Federalist Society's Practice Group telephone conference call on drone delivery service. My name is Christian Corrigan, and I'm Director of Publications here at the Federalist Society. As always, please note that all expressions of opinion are those of the expert on today's call. Also, this call is being recorded for use as a podcast in the future. Today, we welcome Professor Gregory McNeal, Associate Professor of Law at Pepperdine University Law School. Professor McNeal is a Professor of Law and Public Policy at Pepperdine University and a Forbes contributor. His research focuses on the intersection of law, security, public policy, and emerging technologies. Professor McNeal has testified before Congress regarding privacy issues associated with integrating UASs into domestic airspace, state governments on the drafting of drone-related legislation, and he has consulted with manufacturers and other Fortune 500 companies on matters related to security, privacy, and law. And he's twice appeared before the Association of Unmanned Aerial Vehicles to discuss drones and their integration into national airspace. He has also discussed drones and other security matters on CNN, NBC, Nightly News, NPR, CBS, Al Jazeera, Fox News Channel, and other media outlets. You can also find him on Twitter at Gregory McNeal. His posts about drones can also be found by searching for his name, Greg McNeal, at the Forbes website. So to preserve more time for his presentation, let's turn it over now to Professor Greg McNeal, who's going to tell us about this very interesting topic and give us first, I believe, a background on the issue, and then give us sort of the a discussion of all that's going on. So, Professor McNeal.
All right, thanks, and thanks everyone for joining us today, especially on such a short notice teleforum. So let me sort of start by hitting on the news story that got everyone interested, which was the Jeff Bezos' announcement on 60 Minutes that Amazon would like to use drones, unmanned aerial vehicles. I'm just going to use the term drones. I know there are people in industry who don't like the term drone. I actually wrote a post at Forbes about why we should just call it a drone. It's the colloquial term, and I don't think it has the negative connotations associated with it that some people try and attribute to it. So I'm just going to use the term drone. So if your first question is, why am I using the term drone? Think up your second question, because there's your answer. And so, Bezos says that he wants to use drones to deliver Amazon products within 30 minutes. In the interview, he basically said that it was products under 5 pounds, basically, which is 86% of what Amazon delivers. And if you think about Amazon Prime's service, they're eating a lot of the cost of delivery through, they have obviously favorable contracts with UPS, but they eat a lot of the cost of delivery so they can maximize the volume of their products sold. So it's a small margin business for them. And if they could cut out the UPS contract and then also have a competitive advantage against other stores, Walmart, Target, others that don't have same-day delivery or 30-minute delivery, you can see how they could really make substantial profits. And so the idea caught everyone's attention. I saw it Sunday night on 60 Minutes to give you an idea of the amount of public attention associated with this. I put my Forbes post up analyzing it and the FAA issues by midnight Pacific time midnight Eastern time on Sunday. And by Monday morning, it was like 45,000 page views or something. So a lot of public attention associated with this. And I think that's actually an important point. Like, I don't have to tell the people on the call that this is something that people are interested in, but the fact that you're interested in it and that others are interested in it is actually important, because up until this point, the narrative about the integration of drones into domestic airspace has been almost entirely dominated by, think of the privacy implications. The police are going to have drones and spy on me. My neighbor's going to fly a drone over my backyard and watch me while I'm sunbathing. Oh my gosh, aircraft will be in the sky and be able to look down into my backyard, and that has never happened before, which we all know is not true. Aircraft fly over people's backyards all the time. They can see into your backyards. Neighbors can see into your backyard. But privacy was what dominated the discourse. And in fact, privacy dominated the discourse in state legislatures as well, with some states making technology-based legislation, for example, introducing legislation seeking to ban the use of drones, but not doing anything about to gather information from the air, but not doing anything about a similarly placed aircraft that would be gathering the exact same information. And so you have this sort of civil libertarian panic about privacy issues. Now, there are some privacy issues, but they're not drone specific. The collection of information about individuals in their backyards raises a privacy issue, whether it's from a helicopter with a person using a camera, whether it's from a Cessna with a person using a camera, or whether it's from a remote control airplane. And so the drone isn't really the privacy, doesn't raise privacy issues itself. It's just a catalyst for those issues. And so what Bezos did was shifted the debate, I think, by saying, listen, that it's not just a spy aircraft. Look at the things that we can do. And we all know from the polls that people say they care about privacy, but they really like sharing their photos on Facebook or on Instagram. And so consumers favor a lot of conveniences more than they favor privacy. At least if you look at how they act versus what they say about their beliefs. And so, but with Bezos showing that, look, you could be, he didn't show this example, but one I used in one interview was you could be getting ready to go out that night for dinner. And you look down at your outfit and you realize your belt doesn't match your shoes. And you don't have a belt. You left it in the hotel on your most recent business trip. And you could take out your iPhone, order up a belt, and while you're taking your shower and shaving, or not to be gender biased, while you're getting out of the shower, blow drying your hair and putting on your makeup, by the time you're done doing that, longer for some of us, you could walk out the door, pick up the belt, put the belt on, and be ready to go, never having had to waste time going to the store. So the efficiencies are the types of things that resonate with people. And now the debate shifted a little bit to what about the safety issues, which is important because the safety issues are really the mandate of the FAA. There are other uses for unmanned systems that are drones that are important as well. So not just for delivery, but for agricultural purposes. There are realtors who want to be able to use drones for documenting homes that they want to sell. You could have, if you're a cattle rancher in Texas, instead of going out and walking the fence line, you could program in on your iPad the route that you want the drone to fly, hand launch it, and it'll fly out and check your fence line along the way. Some of these systems are very advanced and relatively inexpensive. So we're talking under $1,000 for a very advanced system that you could buy from a company called 3D Robotics. For under $500, you could go to the Brookstone store and buy a Parrot AR drone that you fly with your iPad, or you could get very sophisticated systems that replace the boom-mounted camera systems that movie companies use. Now they use drones for that. So if you remember the most recent James Bond movie, there's a rooftop chase scene where Bond is chasing a guy from one rooftop to another, and the camera is following him. That entire scene was filmed by a drone. You can see journalists want to use them. The UK is far more advanced than we are on this point, where the BBC, for example, has an entire drone journalism unit, and they're getting to the point where they'll be using drones. They'll have drones in the back of the news truck, and when they need to do a quick shot of the scene, be it an accident scene or fire or whatever else it is, the drone could zoom in on the reporter, then zoom out and pan over the scene, providing the types of imagery that really required sophisticated production equipment to do before. So there's lots of potential for drones: oil platform security and inspections, oil pipeline inspections. I mean, the list goes on, and that's another important point that I think got lost for a while in the debate about privacy. Bezos shows us this and says, look how innovative and creative Amazon is, but there are tons of small companies in Silicon Valley, startup companies that have already developed this type of technology. There's a company called Skycatch that has already developed autonomous pickup and delivery. There's another company that has developed a series of landing pads that they want to put on the roofs of fire companies and police stations. And when you call 911, instead of it taking the average response time being 7 to 8 minutes for someone to show up and see what your 911 call was, they've figured out that in the right size cities, within a minute and a half, they could have a drone over the location of the 911 call, transmitting images back to the 911 operator. So if the 911 operator hears that the call is about a fire and the neighbor's house is on fire, within a minute, the 911 operator might be able to see that, yeah, there's smoke, but it's just a guy burning his leaves in his backyard. It's not a fire. And now we don't need to waste the time of the 7-minute trip out, the 5-minute investigation, and the 7-minute trip back, meaning that you've basically got 20 minutes of downtime where that fire crew isn't able to respond to another emergency. So you can have a system there that would also really allow us to have quicker response times for first responders. All of these types of innovations are the type of thing that you see if you go to the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, AUVSI, their national conference. The most striking thing about it is that you'll see the Northrop Grumman sort of booth advertising their Predators and Reapers, and then their smaller systems, or a company like AeroVironment that really focuses on middle-sized drones. Their systems like the Cube police helicopter or the Raven airplane, and those big companies are there, but then right next to them are 3 guys from Silicon Valley who say, sure, you could go buy the Northrop Grumman system for $50,000, but if you're a small police department and you just want to be able to look over a fence to make sure that there isn't somebody with a gun there before you go serve that warrant, our system will work for $3,000, and all you need is an iPad and an hour of training. And so it's a startup industry where the barriers to entry are really low. And the reason why those barriers to entry are so low is because the technology is basically remote-controlled airplanes and helicopters, that sort of hobbyist technology, mashed up with what we all carry now, smartphones. And so if you think about how your smartphone works, you step out, you're in D.C. or New York, and you're kind of lost. You pull out your Google Maps app, you touch that little triangle caret in the corner, and it zooms in on your exact location. And then as you turn left and right, it's got GPS and it's got a gyroscope, and it knows what direction you're facing. And as you walk, it tracks where you're at. That exact same phone is basically the type of camera system that can be integrated in one of these drones. And when you put in, I want to go from Capitol Hill to Georgetown, it plots the route for you using a map. And similar mapping software plots the route from A to B for a drone. And so this is how Bezos will be able to, and other companies will be able to deliver these types of products. Basically, they'll give you a landing pad that you put in your backyard, and you'll either be required to ensure that the landing pad is unobstructed, from the pad straight up to the sky, no Christmas lights, power lines, or trees in the way. Or it might have a camera on it that looks up to make sure there are no obstructions, and it'll have a little cell phone like what's in a Kindle, a little cell phone radio antenna that will communicate back to Amazon the exact GPS location of that landing pad and the fact that it's unobstructed. And when you make your order will have pre-encoded, or your order will connect up with your landing pad in your backyard, make sure that it's unobstructed, send the GPS location, and then the drone will head out. And the drone from point A to point B merely needs to make sure that it doesn't run into obstacles, that weather can't knock it down, and that it doesn't run into other aircraft in the airspace. And that's where the FAA comes in. The FAA, in 2012, the Congress passed the FAA Modernization Act, basically calling on the FAA to develop a plan by 2015 to integrate drones into the national airspace. The FAA responded to that, spent a bit of time responding to privacy concerns, and then came back with their roadmap for how they plan to have a 5-year development process for integration of drones into the national airspace. The first part is to look at existing systems. So right now, if you want to fly a drone, You can only do it for recreational purposes or non-commercial purposes, as the FAA defines that, or you have to have a certificate of authorization from the FAA. And so that's for large unmanned systems like we're using on the borders, or for systems that smaller systems that are used on a limited basis for like firefighting, search and rescue, those types of things. So if you don't have case-by-case approval, you're not allowed to use a drone unless you're using it within your line of sight or you're using it for non-commercial purposes. And so Amazon wouldn't fall within that regulatory guidance right now, and so they're hoping that rules will be developed that will allow them to use their systems. They have some obstacles. The first obstacle that they have is that in the drone roadmap, what the FAA said was that their assumptions in developing the roadmap was that they assumed that each drone would have a flight crew appropriate to fill the operator's responsibilities that would include a pilot in command per drone. And so this will probably kill Amazon's proposal. There's no way that they're going to want one person commanding each drone as it goes out on its delivery, because the employee costs associated with that would make it infeasible. The pilot in control has to have full control or override authority to assume control at all times during the operations. So if you take out the one pilot per drone rule, then Amazon might be able to fit into this, where you might have someone who supervises 10 drones that are autonomously being piloted, watching to make sure that there aren't any issues, and then if there are issues, they could take control of that drone. That regulatory guidance is problematic, I think, because it assumes that a human in control would do a better job of sensing and avoiding other aircraft than an automated system would. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case. With the right software, I think if you're Amazon, you might have a drone going out from point A to point B, and let's say it's going to basically take a route that takes it down at 400 feet in height, but basically down Interstate 95, but it's 400 feet in the air, tracing the line of Interstate 95. And there's another drone coming back along that same route at 400 feet. Those drones, if they're able to sense that the other drone is there through a transponder of some sorts or by computer programmed flight plans that integrate with one another, one drone's going to drop 10 feet or the other drone's going to go up 15 feet, and they'll fly right by each other. I think that with an automated system, you could manage that a lot more efficiently than you could than persons could manage that. But the FAA's guidance right now is first developing in a way that assumes that they're going to develop rules that treat unmanned systems exactly the same as manned systems, which is good for how you're treating it for privacy purposes. But if you're doing it that way for navigation purposes, it's not such a good idea. In fact, we all remember the story. I'm taking 20 minutes on this, just so you know, so I've got 5 minutes left. We all remember the story of Captain Sully Sullenberger that landed the airplane on the Hudson River, and he was like a big hero. And that's great and all, but there have been some scientific studies by some aerospace engineers out of Australia that tested a variety of crash landing scenarios, and they found that if you to a degree of statistical certainty, that if you were in an aircraft and you had an automated crash landing computer system that had to identify safe places for you to crash land, or you put a pilot in a simulator and gave him the same amount of time or her the same amount of time to try and find a place to crash land, you're more likely to live if the computer system is identifying the places for you to crash land than the pilot. And so, believe it or not, Sully loses to the computer just like some chess players lose to computers in those types of circumstances. And so I'm not convinced that the FAA's approach, if it's the approach that controls for the long term, I'm not convinced that pilot in command is necessarily the best thing that we could have happening. I mean, so take the driverless car example as well. Driverless cars are far more likely to not have accidents versus people. They don't get distracted. They know how to respond in a way to certain hazards that people otherwise might overreact to. And so that's just stage one, though, of the FAA's roadmap, where they're going to deal with existing systems. They're going to develop this regulatory guidance along these assumptions. But then they also have this second phase where they're going to integrate new technology, and then a third phase where they're going to ensure that their rules are responsive to the developments in technology. And that suggests that further down the road, as technology is proven at various test sites and other ways, that the FAA might bend and make their rules accommodate the type of thing that Bezos wants to do. The only problem I see with that is, first, the regulatory obstacles can really stifle innovation. If you don't believe that the regulatory environment is going to be accommodating to you, there's a period of time where you're just spending money on the hopes that the FAA is going to have rules that accommodate you, and there are not a lot of startups that can sustain that type of R&D for that lengthy period of time in the hopes that an agency that took a decade to allow us to use our cell phones during takeoff and landing, that regulatory agency is going to be responsive to those concerns. So we do have the possibility that this startup industry, as I described it before, could die in its cradle if the FAA is not responsive to the needs of the industry and new innovations. Now, they seem to be sensitive to this, right? They seem to want to pay attention to it, but they have competing interests, right? Their overarching responsibility is to ensure the safety of the airspace, and that is an unyielding goal when it has to butt up against the possibility of innovation. And because of the sort of demonization of drones, there is the possibility that there will be widespread sort of anger and overreaction to any type of accident or crash involving a drone in a way that you might not see when other small aircraft crash, like Cessnas crash all the time, and there's just not widespread outrage over the fact that someone decided that on a couple thousand hours of training they'd be able to go rent an airplane and fly it around over a neighborhood, but now a 5 or 10 pound helicopter landing in someone's backyard and dropping an Amazon box might very well be a big controversial thing, and that's the type of overreaction and demonization that you'll see. In fact, the people who write about drones and comment on them, particularly the privacy lobby people, oftentimes focus on the safety record of drones as if that has something to do with the privacy arguments, or they'll critique a drone because a drone crashed somewhere without ever noting the crash rates of a variety of other pieces of equipment. And so, so those are some of the obstacles I think that the industry faces going forward. And I think that the FAA is going to be responsible to that heightened level of public concern. Now, one final point on this, as sort of an empirical matter, I say that there's this public concern, and it's largely like a snarky Twitterverse sort of public concern where you get a Rand Paul filibuster and you get sort of over-the-top statements about drones that conflate, small helicopter delivery drones with predators in Afghanistan. But there is one thing to note, which is that the FAA opened a notice and comment period about the privacy implications of drones, seeking public commentary, and I wrote a piece about Forbes about this because it was just so funny to me that there was the FDA issued a notice about flavored milk. That notice got something like 27,266 public comments, and across the entire nation, the FAA's drone privacy thing got 51 comments across the entire country, which sort of indicates that that there's not a lot of public interest in the privacy issues. There's just a lot of sort of like clickbait, I think, headlining with the privacy issues. And it's not, and I shouldn't just end on privacy because it's not all about privacy. There are a lot more uses for drones where, for example, Amazon has zero interest in putting a camera on a drone. Because if they have to put a 1 pound camera on a drone, that means they went from a 5 pound payload to a 4 pound payload, and they've now cut out a pound's worth of products that they otherwise could develop. There's no commercial interest on their part in documenting the route to where they're going. And so unless the camera system would somehow be part of the sense and avoid system, there's no reason for Amazon to want to put cameras on drones. So there are not big privacy implications in my mind. And so I'm going to stop there. That was about 22 minutes, and I'm happy to go to Q&A.
Great. Thanks a lot, Professor McNeal. We'll open the floor to our audience's questions. We do have over 100 people on the line right now, so in a moment, if you'd like to ask a question, you'll hear a prompt that says the floor mode is on. After that, to request the floor, enter star and then the pound key. Again, that's star and the pound key. When we get your request, you will hear a second prompt that will say your microphone has been turned on. You have the floor. We'll answer the questions in the order in which they are received. So if you have a question for Professor McNeal, press star and then the pound key. All right, the questions are lining up. We'll go to our first caller now.
John Rowland, Constitution.org. As a pilot, both of fixed-wing and small ultralight aircraft, I'm sensitive to the problems that are being faced here. The main problem, of course, is safety. Privacy concerns apply as well to manned aircraft, and any light aircraft flying low can do the same thing a drone can do, as far as privacy is concerned. So the main problem that unmanned drones present is a potential large increase in the number of vehicles in the air in a given area at the same time. As long as human beings are operating them, there probably won't be that many. But if we get millions of these things up in the air all the time, then there's a potential for conflict that would be unmanageable by the air traffic control system. Flights of birds and schools of fish have managed to avoid collisions by being able to sense one another's movements, and which enables them to engage in swarm behavior. And it seems to me that if you don't want to kill the technology with a lot of expensive lawsuits, that what you're going to need to do is equip each of them with a standardized method of swarm behavior.
Right. So thanks for the I guess it wasn't a question, John, but I always love how John's one of our frequent Teleform participants. It's always interesting questions, John, and I love your ability to be the first out of the box or one of the first. We should go to the range sometime and shoot because you've got a quick trigger finger. So you've raised some good issues, and I think that industry is starting to try and address this as well. So there are groups in Silicon Valley who are trying to find a way that maybe there's this interim space, right, where you're not going to expect manned aircraft. Ultralight raises a problem for me, but you're probably not going to expect in a space about 50 feet above the tallest trees up to about 400 feet. You're probably not going to expect a lot of air traffic in that that relatively low airspace. And so that's the space where a lot of the people in Silicon Valley think within certain population centers, you might actually be able to establish what they might refer to as air roadways or air highways that establish sort of predetermined flight paths. So any of you who have done boating before sort of know that there are just certain channels that you fly between, and those channels could have established altitudes for outbound, westbound drones, and eastbound drones might have another altitude. And so that's one mitigating factor that the FAA might begin to look at. And then another would be that certainly if you're dealing with quadcopters that have sense and avoid technology that sort of announce their presence and where they are and require other systems, just like what they're thinking about doing with driverless cars, that every system has to maintain a certain three-dimensional buffer space from itself to others. So you could say 50 feet from itself to other unmanned vehicles. They'll be able to avoid one another. And then the only challenge then will be how do you integrate that system of, it's almost like a computer network, right? You're moving, bits and bytes throughout a network system. They all sort of know where they are, the packets, and how do you ensure now that when you integrate manned aircraft into that networked system that's all communicating that the manned aircraft are aware. Now, one way to avoid that too is that you program the drones to avoid those types of circumstances and places. So it's not that we would have necessarily free reign of the airspaces, but we might establish control zones where unmanned systems can operate. That the technology is already available for that now. So if I buy one of these under $1,000 3D robotics drones, which I've been begging my wife to let me buy, I can establish a GPS fence around the local airport or over the neighbor's house who gets upset about the fact that I'm always operating my drone over his backyard. And the drone, upon hitting that fence, will just stop and have to find a way around it. Or when I log my flight plan, the software will automatically route the aircraft around it. So there are technology solutions, I think, here. And the big challenge, of course, will be ensuring that those technology solutions take account of the safety issues that you've raised, John.
Fantastic. Well, we have one more question on the line, and then our lines will be open. So again, if you'd like to ask a question to Professor McNeal, press star and then the pound key. Star and the pound key.
Hi, this is Joseph Silva.
Hi, Joe.
I'm a lawyer in Panama City, Florida. Quick question. You're talking about, we're addressing the technical aspects of the unmanned vehicle, and that's all. I think we're all aware of where the technology is. What about, let's just, for the sake of argument, envision the very near term where drones are essentially upgraded so that they meet whatever the technical regulatory requirements are. But assuming that this vision of the future comes to pass, how might one consider addressing the potential privacy issue? Could it be possible that perhaps and I think this is unreasonable, but at the same time, I wonder if somebody would advocate, well, sure, have as many drones as you want, but we need to limit their ability to look down and essentially eavesdrop. Could that be a potential?
Right. And Joe, can I ask a clarification question there? Is your concern government or other?
Yeah, more than, and it's really just because I think we're all aware of how bureaucratic inertia would get these things. I can envision this happening, and it's going to happen, and we're going to have all these airspace considerations, but I think we're sophisticated enough to work around that. So the real question, I guess, that we're here for is, what are the implications on privacy issues, and are we talking about, you got that stuff, it picks something up, and is it subject to the plain sight doctrine kind of thing?
Right. So let me address that then. So in my testimony before the House Judiciary Committee, I addressed some of this, but here's what I envision on this, and it's not drone specific. It's really just another way of conceptualizing the privacy issues. There are two major privacy issues that I see with the with emerging technologies, and those technologies can include not only drones and aerial surveillance, but cameras on light poles, license plate readers, dash cams on police cars. The first is collection, and then the second is storage. And so, with regard to collection, I think as a statutory matter, we could reconceptualize the expectation of privacy in a way that addresses the concerns of pervasive surveillance. And so the idea that your town could park a blimp overhead and just watch everyone at every point in time to see what they're doing. You sort of have that already in New York, and people seem okay with it, but I think it'll be more troublesome as the technology advances and is able to track people. And so maybe for collection purposes, we might say, and we could argue about the time hacks that I'm putting on this, but we could say that the police could look at whoever they want for as long as they want for 4 hours. But if they're going to look at someone for longer than 4 hours, they need reasonable suspicion to be able to do that. So let's say from 4 to 12 hours. When they get to, and the reasonable suspicion standard very low, right? But it allows the police to do a lot, right? It allows them to stop and frisk someone, so certainly they'd be able to look at that person. without there being an additional liberty implication. And then maybe once you get to 12 hours and beyond, you start to look at maybe a court order is required for 12 to 24 hours. And if you're going to follow someone for longer than 24 hours, maybe we would require a warrant, a specific type of surveillance warrant for that duration of time. And maybe you'd put those time hacks at a different place than I would, but I think that's something that we could calibrate through the legislature rather than having courts try and do it, which who knows what number they would arbitrarily pick in whatever case it was. So that's how I'd address the collection aspect, be it police looking at and following people versus using cameras or drones to follow and track people. Then on the storage side, then you've got the bigger issues of, let's say that they do it and now they keep all of this information for a lengthy period of time and they data warehouse it and they can go back and see every one of your movements and everything that you've done for a lengthy period of time. That's problematic as well. And so I think that you'd want to have a set of rules that say that the police could maintain those records for I think 30 days would be okay, or 60 days. Some privacy advocates want them, in some of the bills, want them deleted, the information deleted within 24 or 48 hours, which to me is just crazy. You can imagine someone saying, agonizing about whether or not they should go to the police about something that they witnessed, and then the evidence gets destroyed within 48 hours. That just seems absurd to me. And so, you could see 30, 60, 6 months even, or a year. I mean, the NSA has a 5-year destruction rule. Whatever your rule is, you might then, rather than destroying the information, I would say that then the information needs to be pushed to an offsite server. And if you want to be able and the only way you can access it is with a probable cause warrant signed off by a judge, and you'd have to have a statutory procedure for that, just like we have statutory procedures, Title III procedures for wiretaps. And so that allows the government to achieve the goal of wanting to be able to retain information for use for a legitimate law enforcement purpose, but also addresses the civil libertarian concern of not wanting this to be pervasive collection for, prurient interests or whatever else. And the argument then we would have about is what's a reasonable amount of time to retain that information, and what standards is probable cause the standard to be able to access them. That's sort of how I'd address this, the collection end and the storage end, because I don't think it's possible to make a rule here that says, like some places want to say, anyone who uses a camera from an aircraft to document private property shall have violated this statute. Well, does that mean then, as I'm on approach at the DC airport and I lean out and I take a picture of someone that I violated, I take a picture of someone's private property that I violated their privacy rights? Or there was a bill in Massachusetts that said any aerial surveillance, which was defined as aerial photography of a person without their consent, is a violation of the statute. And so if I look down out of an airplane, take a photograph of people at Niagara Falls who are taking photos of the falls, did I have to get the permission of every one of those people? And if I post my photo on Instagram or YouTube, does every one of those otherwise unidentified people now have the right to sue me? And then you've got some other poorly worded bills that try and address this from a technology perspective instead of from a collection and storage perspective, like the one in North Carolina that basically said, if you use a drone to collect information, you violated the statute. If you destroy the information that you've collected, you violated the statute because you're supposed to retain it in a way that it could be used against you in a lawsuit. But if you retain the information, you've also violated the statute. So they're like, the only person happy with that North Carolina bill is a trial lawyer, because you're putting the government in a position where they've got retention issues and they've got spoliation of evidence issues, and of course the fact that they initially collected as well. So I think looking at the technology itself is the wrong way to do it, and instead to focus on collection and storage and rules associated with that. It's kind of a lengthy answer to your question. Sorry.
Professor, can you still hear me?
Yes. Are you still there, Joe?
Yeah. Good. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. That kind of begs this question, which I think is probably extreme, and I wouldn't envision anybody going to this length. But what about simply banning? It's such a new horizon for us to be subject to our backyards quite literally being subject to inspection from public space. And it's one thing to be out across the street and you can't see over the privacy fence, and this is obvious, but clearly it's another thing to be over top looking down. Would
right.
that potentially give rise to some movement, I presume, amongst privacy lobbyists that, hey, you know what, we'll simply prohibit the collection of any data overhead?
Yeah, there's room for the states to do this. So Oregon, for example, I have a case I teach in my Crim Pro class about Oregon's approach to curtilage. So we all know that the open fields doctrine basically has reduced. The open fields doctrine basically says you have no reasonable expectation of privacy in an open field. Florida versus Riley and California versus Serralo, for Fourth Amendment purposes, have basically told us that backyards are essentially open fields because they don't satisfy the 4 done factors for curtilage. They're not intimately tied to the home. You don't do things in your backyard that would entitle you to home-like protections in your backyard. But what Oregon does is looks at these issues and says, well, as a matter of Fourth Amendment, as a matter of Oregon constitutional purposes, we look at this and we say, you do have some expectations of privacy in your backyard as a matter of the Oregon Constitution if you've put up signs and put up a fence and manifested your own subjective expectation that you don't want people trespassing into your curtilage. And so in the case, it basically says, listen, like hikers, we're an outdoor state, big wide open areas on ranch land, no expectation of that. But if you've got a backyard and you put up a sign, you put up a fence, we're more likely to believe that has some expectation of privacy associated with it that would want to such that we would keep out evidence collected by government agents in those circumstances. So you can see the states sort of experimenting with these types of things and going with protections beyond that of what the Supreme Court has said for Fourth Amendment purposes. And they could do that as a statutory matter, or their courts might start cooking those things up on their own. And that won't protect you from the federal government flying a drone over your house, but it'll protect you from your local law enforcement being able to admit that evidence against you in court. And so I think there is some room for experimentation there, if not outright bans, then creating factor-based tests for whether or not the person really has an expectation of privacy in their backyard. I mean, the odd thing about this whole thing to me is that I recall Rand Paul's filibuster where he said, I want to know, Mr. Attorney General, is the federal government flying a drone over my house, looking at my house? And he was like very concerned with the privacy of like the roof of his home, but like, is he similarly concerned about the privacy of his front door as law enforcement drives down the street with cameras on their vehicles looking at his front door? Or what about just me in the airplane as I'm coming on approach, looking out the window and looking down on his home? And so it's very tough to create an expectation of privacy rule grounded around private property that won't somehow have a series of cascading effects in other ways, like the person looking out their window from a third floor, or the person looking out the window of an airplane. Sort of another lengthy answer to your question, Joe. You're throwing all the hypos at me.
Well, this is Christian Corrigan again. We've got a number of questions still on the line that hopefully we can get to before the end of the hour, so we'll go straight to our next caller.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for speaking today this afternoon.
Sure.
My question is in regard to businesses, and you had mentioned the controversy surrounding the uses of drones, especially for commercial uses. And I'm wondering if Google's recent announcement about trying to use drones to make these 30-minute deliveries and whatnot, is that a step in the right direction for businesses and for the increased use of drones for commercial purposes? And how should other businesses that are interested in this type of technology, how should they approach the FAA's very slow process in terms of creating some kind of framework for the use of drones? What is, in your opinion, the best steps that a business can take?
So if I take your question correct, I'm getting weird feedback. The most recent caller, if you have, if your microphone's still on, I think I'm getting feedback. Kristen, if we could turn off the most recent questioner. Sorry. So I think that your question is really going to how can industry be involved in the regulatory development process? And this is a critique I had at what I call the drone show, the Industry Association's conference, where I was pretty convinced that on privacy issues and on safety issues, that industry really was not being a participant in the FAA's rulemaking process. And so I think that has the potential to, if you're not willing to step up and say why your product that you're developing is valuable and why the FAA should accommodate your product, then the FAA is never going to hear your voice, and they might not craft rules that are responsive to your particular concerns. And so AUVSI, the industry association, is the sort of lone advocate in that fight. And then you have now Amazon coming in. The question is, will Amazon be willing to join the lobbying fight? There are some groups that are pretty active in this, and so in Silicon Valley there's a group called Air Highway that's trying to get together to help craft rules that all of the different industry advocates can agree upon. And then but they're in a fight with the privacy advocates who are sort of all aligned around, not all aligned, but many of them see an outright ban on drones being a good idea until they can get the privacy rules that they want in place. And so they're willing to throw out the drone baby with the bathwater until they get what they want, and that's to be expected, right? I mean, if you're a privacy advocating or civil liberties advocating organization, that's your one thing, and so the collateral damage of you achieving your privacy goals might very well be technological innovation. And so I think industry has to be a lot more responsive to that, and there should be more. Lobbying is a bad word, but there should be more lobbying and interest group sort of advocacy associated with allowing these aircraft to be integrated into the airspace. And so I haven't seen a lot of that type of movement. I'm actually surprised by it, given the number of small companies that have the potential to make money on this. I think AUVSI said this is a couple $2 billion industry, or at least has the potential to be one. Christian, you still there?
We have, we've got 3 more questions pending. So if our callers could please keep your questions as brief as possible, so that.
And I'll keep my answers more brief.
And Greg, do you have a hard stop at the end of the hour, or could you go over for a couple minutes?
I do. At the end of the hour, in fact, I have a hard stop, but then we're taking the conversation onto Twitter, and Forbes is hosting a Twitter chat on the same thing, where all you do is you just tweet your question with the hashtag #AskForbes, and it won't just be me, it'll be 3 other experts on drones.
Great. All right. Well, we'll try to get through as many of these remaining questions as possible.
John Rowland back. Let's examine the constitutional issues here and the conflict of territorial jurisdictions between the federal government and the states. We have both states and the federal government considering legislating or rulemaking over the same physical space. And that's undoubtedly going to lead to conflicts of its own. Now, from the constitutional standpoint, I find no authority in the Constitution for the federal government to regulate air traffic. What they have effectively done is seize territorial jurisdiction over airspace, although they asserted also the right to define the limits, the lower limits of that airspace. And there has been no cession of that territory by state legislatures under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. So unless we're going to amend the Constitution, I foresee a fundamental problem with the attempt for the federal government to regulate air traffic at all, as much as I appreciate the way they do it.
So John, I think that. So you're making an argument that we could extend to a lot of other areas under which the federal government has expanded their authority under the Commerce Clause. I think that air safety and regulating airspace is certainly a Commerce Clause type issue. The interesting thing that the FAA is doing for the first time under its mandate to regulate with regard to drones is that they had previously not regulated the airspace basically below 400 feet. Now they are claiming the authority to regulate the airspace 1 inch above the blade of grass in your backyard, or basically a centimeter, a millimeter, from your backyard straight up to the skies. They've now claimed that that's all navigable airspace that the FAA can regulate. And so that's the new interesting expansion of federal government authority here. I think we would lose on any lawsuit over it, despite any of the constitutional issues that you've raised. Christian, we can go to the next one.
All right.
Good afternoon. This is Jim Burnley. I'm a partner at Venable in Washington, and I've really enjoyed your commentary. And to put in context what I'm about to say, I should also note I was Secretary of Transportation in the Reagan administration. The notion that the FAA will adhere to the timelines in its roadmap on issuing regulations is pure fantasy based on the history of the organization. I mean, the one thing I would predict with confidence is that they will not have rules out by 2015. That lethargy plus the safety bias, which I will be the first to say I appreciate and applaud, that is inherent in the FAA, make it very likely, in my judgment, that the FAA will, largely unintentionally, but will inevitably thwart the technological progress that the Amazon proposal is just one manifestation of. So unless and until there is a consensus in the Congress to circumscribe the FAA's jurisdiction, there is very little reason to be optimistic that we will see these kinds of commercial applications anytime in the near future. And I apologize, that's not a question, it's a comment, but I welcome your reaction.
Jim, it's a great comment, and you know, I'm a drone geek. I'm writing books about drones, and I'm an Amazon geek. I buy everything on Amazon Prime, you know, so I'm super excited about this. And I also agree with your very every one of your sentiments, right? That this is a textbook example of how regulation can stifle innovation and prevent the development of a new industry. And the only hope that I hold out for this, because you're also correct to say that we would then have to see Congress take action on this, and Congress, if it wants to change the FAA's regulatory ambit specifically for drones, is going to face all the anti-drone crazy people out there who think that drones are spying on them, even if we're talking about drones without cameras, who think drones are going to shoot and kill them, even if we're just talking about delivery drones, right? All the issues will be conflated, and if you're a member of Congress, you have to be responsive to that type of commentary just as much as you have to be responsive to industry. So the way I see this playing out actually is that, you know, aerial delivery is already being implemented in Australia. The UK is already far more advanced on their unmanned aerial system regulations. Canada is a more responsive and environment for it, where industry might be able to go to those markets first, and we'll start shedding market share to other developed economies that are more accommodating to this. And while we'll have the manufacturing capability here, we won't have the service industry here, and this is a service economy. And so I think that's the way that you might see Congress start to respond. And maybe that's a good thing. Let a bunch of drones fall out of the sky in Australia until they work out the issues and the technology there, and then we'll have some safe ones here in the States. But I actually, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think that the safety issues are as big as I don't think they're as insurmountable as people make them out to be. I mean, if Amazon wants to start launching delivery by drone, they're not going to do it in topographically challenging areas with bad weather like Seattle. They're going to start in Phoenix, where it's flat, there are no trees, the weather's pretty consistent, and they'll do limited market development and deployment where they can work out the airspace and terrain and weather issues. And if the FAA allows them to do that, even on a limited basis, where Phoenix becomes an entire test site or something, I think that might be a way that we might move forward on a more developmental timeline. But the FAA has already missed one of their deadlines on drone rules, and so the idea that they're going to hit the 2015 deadline is a hope. And I think you're right to say that it's almost a pipe dream.
Well, that takes us right up to about our stop time.
We can take one more, Christian, if you want.
Okay, can you get one more in? Okay.
Yeah, let's do one more.
Please, so to our next caller, please try to make your question as brief as possible.
Hi, Professor McNeal. This is Matt Rackety, Mason Law School student. You've actually answered more or less all of my questions.
Okay, great.
So I'll end with a brief comment, somewhat funny. I retweeted the Economist article on this, and with prefaced with the rise of Skynet, and very shortly after that, I got a tweet from the Terminator saying that he is here to protect us. So there's nothing to worry about, which is good to know. But actually, somewhat on that point, in terms of security issues, terrorism, for example, and dealing with that end of things, can you maybe briefly comment on that?
Yeah, so, some people started to respond about this, like now terrorists are going to start delivering bombs by drones. And I was just thinking to myself, like, because Amazon wants to deliver products by drones, now terrorists are going to deliver bombs through Amazon. Like, if you've got a bomb, you're going to like break into the Amazon distribution facility and open up the box and sneak the bomb into the box and then seal the box and make sure that it doesn't weigh too much such that the drone can get it out to, or you can just go to the guy's house and bomb the guy's house, right? I mean, so I don't know that that drones change the security situation for us. It's just like people who say, what we're doing with drones now, other countries will start doing too, except for the countermeasure to a slow-moving drone on the battlefield is we'll shoot it down. And, the countermeasure here to terrorists using drones is first that that's not the most efficient way to carry out their attack. And so we've had idiots who've tried to do it. There was a guy that they arrested and prosecuted for the FBI got because he wanted to fly a drone into a bomb-filled remote control airplane. It's a remote control airplane, but everyone now calls remote control airplanes drones when they want to make it sensational. So the guy wanted to fly a remote control airplane into the Capitol building or something filled with explosives. And so, but it doesn't have to be called a drone to do that. We could have done that 20 years ago with a remote control airplane, if you had the idea. So, to me, I don't see on the terrorism side there being a huge expansion of the enemy's capabilities. I do see this being a big force multiplier for counterterrorism purposes. For example, monitoring the Boston Marathon. There's been a lot. I was on a panel where someone from the ACLU said to me, I see big privacy implications from monitoring the Boston Marathon, but I don't really see a legitimate security interest. And my response was that, well, the legitimate security interest would be making sure that people don't put bombs behind toddlers at the marathon. And the privacy interest would be mitigated by the fact that everyone's in public. They're on a street where the cameras are on motorcycles following the runners, broadcasting it on international television. Helicopters are broadcasting this on international television. Cameras are on buildings everywhere. What's the expectation of privacy there? And I didn't really get a good answer from them about it other than, just to say, well, because privacy. And I just don't see big privacy implications for monitoring large public events with an unmanned system if I could do it from a manned system. And so from a counterterrorism perspective, subject to the storage and data issues that I addressed with Joe Silva earlier, I don't see there being big privacy implications so long as you're not storing it for data mining purposes and gathering, long-term information about people. Thanks for that statement and question.
All right. Well, we have reached the end of our time, so I want to thank, on behalf of the Federal Society, Professor McNeal, and remind you that, as he said before, the conversation is now carried over to Twitter, where you can engage with him and other experts using the hashtag AskForbes. You can also engage with him directly via his Twitter handle, @GregoryMcNeal. So thanks very much, and remind you can always engage us here at the Federal Society by email at info@fedsoc.org or via Twitter with @FedSoc. So thanks very much, and until then, we are adjourned.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this practice group podcast. For materials related to this podcast and other Federalist Society multimedia, please visit the Federalist Society's website at federalistsociety.org/multimedia.